It started like any other day, my daughter and I enjoying the afternoon sun, when suddenly everything changed in an instant. One minute, we were laughing, and the next, my world was shattered. A loud bang echoed through the air. I rushed outside, only to find my daughter lying on the ground, blood staining her clothes. Who could do such a thing? The woman who shot her wasn't some random stranger. No, it was Karen, our HOA president. She was fed up with the noise my kids made, and she decided that today she would take matters into her own hands. But what Karen didn't know, I wasn't just some ordinary father. I wasn't just a victim in this story. I commanded the entire police force, and she was about to learn that crossing the line with me would be the biggest mistake of her life. Stay tuned to find a welcome back, everyone. This is a story that has haunted me ever since it happened, and I feel it's time to finally share it. What I'm about to tell you is a nightmare that no parent should ever have to live through. It's a story about an HOA, Karen, someone who took the role of neighborhood enforcer way too seriously and thought she could control everything, including my family. But she messed with the wrong person. You see, I had always considered our neighborhood a safe, peaceful place. A place where we could raise our kids without worrying about judgment from neighbors. Sure, there were the occasional minor disagreements, but nothing major until she moved in. Karen, the self-appointed ruler of the neighborhood, made it her mission to regulate every little thing. From lawn maintenance to noise levels, she was always ready with a complaint. And for months, we'd been hearing about the noise, our kids playing outside, something every other family does. But for Karen, it was a violation of her personal code of conduct. At first, I let slide. I figured we could ignore her. But then came that day, the day it all went too far. When my daughter was shot during a noise complaint, my world came crashing down. And what's even more shocking, Karen had no idea who she was dealing with. I wasn't just some helpless parent. I had the power and authority of the entire police force at my disposal. And that was the moment I knew this would be more than just a neighborhood dispute. So, before I dive into the full details, let me ask you this. Where are you watching this from? Drop your city's name in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this story unfolds. How it all unfolded. It was an afternoon like any other. The sun was hanging high in the sky, casting a warm, golden light across the neighborhood. I had just finished an exhausting week of work, and my daughter, Mia, and I were enjoying a quiet moment together in the backyard. The sounds of her laughter filled the air as she ran around, playing with her friends in the yard. It was the kind of noise you'd expect from any group of children in a peaceful, suburban neighborhood. But little did I know that innocent laughter would soon turn into a nightmare neither of us would ever forget. It all started with a complaint. Of course, it wasn't the first one. Over the past few months, I had received a handful of letters from the Homeowners Association, HOA, about the noise levels coming from our house. At first, I thought it was just a minor issue, kids playing too loudly, running around in the yard, laughing, maybe even a ball bouncing on the driveway. Nothing out of the ordinary, right? But to Karen, our HOA president and self-proclaimed neighborhood enforcer, this was an offense too severe to ignore. Karen had a reputation. She wasn't just a busybody. She was the kind of person who believed she could control everything down to the very sound levels of the neighborhood. The woman had an iron grip on the HOA, and she loved nothing more than using her position to reprimand people who didn't live up to her high standards. We had all seen her walking around with her clipboard, making notes about violations in the neighborhood. Her prying eyes were always watching, ready to jump on any opportunity to make her presence felt. But it wasn't just her obsession with control that made her so unbearable. It was the way she treated everyone as if they were beneath her. Every complaint she sent had a condescending tone, and it always felt like she was looking for an excuse to make someone feel inferior. I wasn't the only one who had dealt with her nonsense. There were other families in the neighborhood who had fallen victim to her crusade for peace and order. She had been a thorn in everyone's side, but we all tried to ignore it, hoping that one day she would lose interest and find someone else to target. Unfortunately, that day never came. So, when the noise complaint arrived again in my mailbox that morning, I wasn't surprised. I opened the letter, shaking my head in disbelief as I read through her latest accusations. Excessive noise, she wrote. Children playing and causing a disruption in the neighborhood. Immediate action required. I scoffed and crumpled up the paper, tossing in the trash. This wasn't the first time she had targeted us, and it surely wouldn't be the last. I knew Mia and her friends weren't doing anything wrong. They were just kids having fun as kids should, but that didn't matter to Karen. She wanted control, and she wasn't going to stop until she had it. But as the day wore on, I started to feel a creeping unease. My daughter was outside with a few of her friends, enjoying the day. There was nothing unusual about the sounds, their laughter, the clink of their toys hitting the pavement, the occasional shout as they played tag. It was a typical afternoon for any family with children. Still, something about the day felt off. The tension in the air was palpable, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was going to make an appearance soon. And sure enough, just as I was about to head inside, I saw her. Karen was standing at the end of my driveway, her arms crossed, glaring at my daughter and her friends. I could tell by the way she was standing that she was about to make her move. She had a look on her face that could only be described as self-righteous fury. It was the same look she always had when she felt like she had the upper hand. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation that was about to happen. I had dealt with her complaints before, but this time I knew it was different. This time it felt personal. I walked toward the driveway, trying to keep my cool. As I approached her, she spoke, her voice dripping with disdain. You need to control your kids. This noise is unacceptable. You've already received multiple warnings from the HOA, and I'm not going to let this go anymore. I didn't even try to hide my frustration. My kids are playing Karen. There's nothing wrong with that, I replied, trying to keep my voice calm, though the anger was bubbling up inside me. She didn't back down. It's disturbing the peace, and if you don't do something about it, I'll be forced to take further action. I could feel my patience wearing thin. What do you want me to do, Karen? Lock my kids inside? They're outside enjoying the day. They're not hurting anyone. But Karen wasn't listening. She was too far gone, too obsessed with her control to care about reason. You have no idea what it's like living next to people who can't control their children, she muttered, almost to herself. I tried to respond, but before I could, she turned and began walking back to her house. I'm going to report this to the HOA, and you'll regret not listening to me, she called over her shoulder. And just like that, she was gone. I watched her retreat into her house, her eyes still filled with that same condescending look. I knew that this wasn't the end of it. She would report us again, and this time, it might escalate even further. But what happened next was something I could never have prepared for. Less than an hour later, as I was inside trying to calm down and reassure Mia, I heard a loud bang. At first, I thought it was a car backfiring, but then I heard another noise closer this time. It was a gunshot. I ran to the window, my heart pounding in my chest, and there she was, Karen, standing in the middle of my driveway holding a gun. My daughter had just stepped outside, and I could see her turn toward the sound of the shot. And then it happened. The second shot rang out, and my daughter screamed as she collapsed to the ground. My world froze. I ran out the door without thinking, adrenaline pumping through my veins. My daughter was lying there, bleeding. I could barely process what was happening. How could Karen have done this? This wasn't just a complaint anymore. This was something far worse. As I rushed to my daughter, I knew two things for certain. First, I had to get her help. And second, Karen had no idea who she was dealing with. Our neighborhood was once a model of suburban tranquility. It was the kind of place where families could relax, children could play outside without fear, and neighbors were friendly. People waved as they drove by, and the sound of lawnmowers and birds chirping filled the air. The streets were lined with neat rows of houses, all meticulously maintained. It was the ideal setting to raise a family, or so I thought. I remember the first time we moved into the neighborhood. Mia was only 6 years old, and we had just moved to a new town after I got a promotion in the police force. We wanted a safe, quiet place for her to grow up, a place with parks, good schools, and neighbors who cared about community. The area was picture perfect. Families everywhere, kids playing together in their yards, and the occasional block party where everyone came together to share a meal. I thought, this is the life we've been looking for. In the beginning, everything was exactly as I had imagined. We unpacked the moving boxes, settled into our home, and Mia made friends quickly. The other families were kind and welcoming, offering to help with whatever we needed. There was an unspoken bond between us all, a shared understanding that we were in this together, creating a community where everyone looked out for each other. But as time went on, one person began to stand out in ways that made us all uncomfortable. Karen. She had lived in the neighborhood for years, long before we arrived. She was a fixture of the community, well known for her role as the president of the HOA, Homeowners Association. At first, I didn't think much of her. She seemed like just another neighbor, someone who kept to herself, but who was always polite when spoken to. But then, slowly I began to notice things. Karen had an almost obsessive need to control everything in the neighborhood. She prided herself on keeping everything just so, from the flowers planted on each lawn to the exact shade of paint that was allowed on fences. If a neighbor's lawn was even a little overgrown, or a mailbox was slightly crooked, Karen would be there with a polite but stern warning. "We have standards to uphold," she would say, acting as if she was doing us all a favor by enforcing the rules. At first, it wasn't a big deal. No one minded mowing their lawns on time or trimming hedges as directed. But the more she exerted control, the more people started to grumble behind her back. It wasn't just the little things anymore. She started giving unsolicited advice about personal matters, dropping hints about how we should behave, what we should wear, and even who we should associate with. At first, we all laughed it off, chalking it up to her quirky personality. But over time, it became clear that she was more than just a busybody. She believed she had the right to dictate the terms of our lives, and her helpful suggestions quickly crossed the line into interference. She had a sharp tongue and a keen sense of superiority that made her hard to ignore. And before long, she started wielding her position as HOA president like a weapon. Her complaints were frequent, and they were always aimed at someone. Sometimes it was the neighbors with the unkempt flower beds. Other times, it was the family down the street whose kids played outside too much. But more and more, her eyes turned toward us. It started with the noise complaints. Our daughter, Mia, and her friends liked to play outside, running around the yard laughing, and sometimes even yelling as they played tag or hide and seek. It was harmless fun, something any kid would enjoy. But to Karen, it was an offense to her idea of peace and quiet. At first, the complaints were polite, at least on the surface. A letter here and there in the mailbox, reminding us to be mindful of the noise. "Please be considerate of the neighbors," they would say. But as the weeks passed, the complaints grew more frequent. Soon, we were receiving letters almost every week, detailing how loud the children were being and how we needed to keep them inside more often. I tried to talk to her, to reason with her, but she would only smile that condescending smile and explain how it was her responsibility to ensure that the neighborhood remained peaceful. She told me that she wasn't trying to be unreasonable, but that people needed to respect the rules. She even claimed that other neighbors were concerned, although when I asked for specifics, she would just change the subject. It was infuriating. The last thing I wanted to do was restrict my daughter's freedom. She was a kid. She had every right to enjoy the outdoors, to run and laugh and play with her friends. But the more Karen pushed, the more I began to feel like I was walking on eggshells, trying to keep the peace while also protecting my daughter's right to live her life. The tension grew, not just in our house, but in the entire neighborhood. Karen's presence started to loom over everyone like a dark cloud. There were whispers in the community about her tactics. Some neighbors, who had lived here long before I had, confided in me about how she had gotten involved in their personal lives. One family told me she had once sent a formal complaint about their mailbox being too colorful. Another neighbor mentioned how Karen had shown up at their door, criticizing the type of flowers they had planted. Karen wasn't just about keeping the neighborhood nice. She was about enforcing her own rigid vision of what it should be, and anyone who didn't fit that mold was fair game. The problem, I soon realized, wasn't just that Karen was a perfectionist, it was that she had grown accustomed to getting her way. People were afraid of her. They were afraid of what would happen if they defied her. And the worst part? She didn't even seem to care about the real problems in the neighborhood. She was too fixated on her idea of order, of perfection, to notice the actual issues at hand, like the dilapidated streetlights that never worked or the drainage system that caused flooding every time it rained. But for Karen, these things didn't matter. She focused on the trivial, the small things that could easily be ignored if only she had let it go. But no, she couldn't. And it wasn't just her obsession with control that made her unbearable, it was the way she treated people. She had a way of looking down on others, a sense of superiority that made it clear she thought she was better than everyone else. And that's when it started to get really uncomfortable. The power she wielded through her role in the HOA began to consume her, and she started to manipulate the system to suit her own needs. No one dared to challenge her. They were too afraid of the consequences, the fines, the warnings, the constant harassment. Everyone, including us, was just trying to survive her reign of control. And then it happened. It started as just another noise complaint, but by the end of the week, I would realize that Karen wasn't just an inconvenience. She was about to destroy everything I loved. My family, my home, my peace, all that was at risk. But I had no idea that a simple noise complaint would be the catalyst for something far worse. And neither did Karen. It was just another Saturday afternoon, the kind of day when the sun shines bright and the air feels crisp with the promise of fall. My daughter Mia, now 8 years old, had just finished her homework, and we decided to take advantage of the good weather by spending time together in the backyard. Her friends from the neighborhood, Sarah, Emily, and Luke, were over running around in the yard playing their usual games. It was the sort of idyllic scene you'd expect in any family-friendly neighborhood. Children laughing, their high-pitched giggles echoing in the distance as they raced around the trees, kicked a soccer ball back and forth, and jumped over the garden fence in a playful race. The sounds were sweet, innocent, the kind of noise that was part of the fabric of childhood. I watched them from the back porch, sipping my coffee, enjoying the peaceful moment that seemed so ordinary and yet so perfect. But little did I know, this afternoon was about to take a terrifying turn that would change our lives forever. Mia and her friends were playing near the driveway when I heard the crunch of gravel beneath heavy footsteps. At first, I thought it was just another neighbor passing by, maybe someone walking their dog. But then I looked up and saw her. Karen, walking down the sidewalk toward my house, her signature scowl already etched across her face. She had an air of authority about her, like she was someone who believed the entire neighborhood operated at her command. I had seen her coming up the street before, clipboard in hand, ready to point out every minor violation in her ever-growing list of grievances. It had always been something small, like when my trash cans were left out too long after pickup or when Mia's toys were scattered in the yard. I had grown used to the complaints. But today, something in her stride told me this encounter would be different. Karen's eyes locked with mine, and she didn't even try to hide her displeasure. She marched straight up to me, her hands on her hips, her face stern. It was as if she was about to deliver a lecture, and from the look on her face, I knew it was going to be a harsh one. "You're letting your kids make noise again," she said, her tone sharp and authoritative. "You've been warned about this before. Don't you think it's time to do something about it?" I stood up from the chair, suddenly feeling the tension in the air. It wasn't just the usual passive-aggressive complaint anymore. This was different. The way she spoke, the coldness in her eyes, it was like she had decided that today she was going to put an end to this once and for all. "Karen," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "they're just playing. It's a beautiful day. They're not doing anything wrong." Her lips twisted into a tight smile, but there was no warmth in it. "This isn't about what's right or wrong. This is about respect for the other people who live here. Not everyone enjoys listening to children scream and yell all day. The words stung, but I held my ground. The kids are playing, Karen. They're just having fun like any other kids. This is a neighborhood, not a retirement home. She took a step closer to me, her eyes narrowing. Don't get smart with me, young man. I'm trying to keep this neighborhood peaceful. You clearly don't care about the other people who live here. I felt my blood start to boil. It wasn't the first time she had made these kind of comments, but something about her tone, the way she made it sound like I was a bad parent for allowing my child to enjoy herself, pushed me over the edge. I opened my mouth to say something, but Karen was already turning away. I'll be reporting this to the HOA again. If you don't get your kids under control, I'll be forced to take further action. And with that, she turned and walked back down the driveway, her heels clicking with every step. But before she reached the end of the sidewalk, she paused, as if considering something for a moment. She then turned her head back toward me, her eyes cold and calculating. You've been warned, and this time there will be consequences, she said, her voice low and threatening. I stood frozen, a sense of dread creeping up my spine. She wasn't just threatening another fine or warning letter. No, something in the way she spoke told me that she had something far worse planned. I didn't have time to dwell on it. I quickly rushed inside to check on Mia and her friends, who were now sitting on the porch, their laughter fading into awkward silence as they noticed the tension. I forced a smile, trying to reassure them that everything was fine. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I watched Karen retreat into her house, and something gnawed at me. This wasn't just about noise anymore. She had made it personal. She was determined to break us, to make us conform to her image of what the neighborhood should be. And I had no idea how far she was willing to go to get her way. As the evening settled in, I couldn't shake the unease I felt in my gut. Karen's words kept echoing in my mind. There will be consequences. What did that mean? I couldn't help but wonder if the next time we crossed paths, it would escalate even further. I didn't have long to wonder. The very next day, as Mia and her friends were playing outside again, the sound of their laughter still in the air, the worst possible thing happened. The sudden sharp crack of a gunshot cut through the afternoon like a knife. My heart stopped. The sound was so loud, so close, that it took a moment for my brain to process what I had just heard. Gunshots weren't a part of this neighborhood. This wasn't the kind of place where you would hear such a thing. But there it was, loud and unmistakable. I rushed to the window, panic flooding my body. There, at the edge of the driveway, stood Karen, her hand raised, a gun in her grasp. Mia and the others were still on the grass, playing, unaware of the impending danger. In that moment, time seemed to freeze. I couldn't think. I couldn't move. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized that Karen, the same woman who had harassed us with petty complaints for months, had just crossed a line that no one could come back from. The second shot rang out before I could even react, and this time, I saw it. Mia screamed, collapsing to the ground in a heap. My mind went blank, and my body moved before I could process what was happening. I ran out the door, calling her name, my voice shaking with fear. Mia! I screamed, but my legs felt like they were moving through molasses as I ran toward her. I could see her lying on the grass, blood spreading around her like a dark pool, her small body unmoving. My heart stopped, my breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I thought I had lost her. But as I reached her, I saw that her eyes were still open, and I couldn't help but feel a fleeting sense of relief. But it was only momentary. As I crouched beside her, my mind flashed to Karen, who was now turning the gun toward me, her eyes wild, a twisted expression on her face. She didn't care anymore. This wasn't about a noise complaint. This was something far worse. My hands trembled as I dialed 911, my voice breaking as I screamed for help. The operator assured me that help was on the way, but all I could think about was the horror I was witnessing. My daughter, the light of my life, was lying in a pool of blood because of one woman's insanity. And Karen? She had no idea who she had just threatened to destroy. She had no idea who she was dealing with. The world felt as though it was spinning out of control. One moment Mia and her friends were laughing, the next, silence. The piercing sound of the gunshot still rang in my ears. Time slowed down as I sprinted toward my daughter, praying, hoping that it wasn't as bad as it seemed. But the sight of her collapsed on the ground, blood pooling beneath her small body, told me everything I needed to know. I could hardly breathe. My mind was racing. What was happening? How could this be happening? It felt like a nightmare, something too absurd to be real. But there was no denying it. Karen, our HOA president, had just shot my daughter. My body moved on instinct. I collapsed next to Mia, cradling her in my arms, desperately trying to assess the damage, but the blood was pouring out too quickly for me to process it all. "Mia, can you hear me?" I choked out, my voice trembling. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment I thought I was imagining things, but there she was, looking up at me with pain and confusion. She was still alive, but I didn't know how much time we had before it became too late. I felt a surge of terror mixed with relief. I wasn't ready to lose her, not like this. Not because of some insane, petty conflict over a noise complaint. The woman who had shot her, Karen, was still standing at the edge of the driveway, staring down at us with a look that made my blood run cold. It wasn't regret. It wasn't even fear. No. Karen had an expression of triumph, as if she had done something justified. "You had your chance," she said, her voice cold and devoid of any humanity. "You should have listened. You should have kept your kids under control." Her words were like a slap in the face. How had things gotten so twisted? How had a simple dispute over noise escalated into an act of violence that no one could have foreseen? I could hardly fathom the depth of Karen's madness. There was no rational explanation for what she had just done. No world where this made sense. She was no longer just an annoying neighbor with too many complaints. She had become a real threat, and she had crossed a line that I could never come back from. I wanted to scream, to shout, to tear her apart for what she had done to my daughter, but I had to keep my focus. I had to make sure Mia was okay. I had to save her. The seconds felt like hours as I pressed my hand over the wound, trying to stem the bleeding. Blood soaked through my fingers, and panic clawed at my throat. What if I couldn't stop the bleeding in time? What if it was too late? With shaking hands, I reached for my phone and dialed 911. The operator answered quickly, but I could barely get the words out. "My daughter, she's been shot by my neighbor. Karen, please help me." "Sir, help is on the way. Stay calm." "What's your address?" the operator said in a calm, practiced voice, but it did nothing to soothe me. Every second felt like an eternity. I gave her our address, but I couldn't take my eyes off Mia. I couldn't look away from her small, pale face, the blood staining her clothes, her tiny body trembling in my arms. "Don't worry, Mia," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Help is coming. Just stay with me. Baby, please." But Mia's eyes, those bright, innocent eyes, were beginning to lose focus. I could see the life slowly draining out of her. A wave of fear, so intense it nearly choked me, swept over me. No, this couldn't be happening. This wasn't supposed to be how her story ended. From the corner of my eye, I saw Karen slowly retreating, still holding the gun in her hand. She wasn't leaving. She was standing there, frozen, watching as if everything she had done was some kind of twisted performance. I couldn't understand it. How could anyone, how could she do something like this? Over a noise complaint? Over a few kids playing in their own yard? I felt my blood boil. I was a police officer. I had seen plenty of things in my career that had tested my composure, but this was different. This wasn't just a crime. This was personal. Karen had no idea what she was messing with. She had no idea who I was or what I could do. I wasn't just some helpless father watching his daughter die in the front yard. This was not the end of the story for me. Not by a long shot. "Karen," I shouted, my voice hoarse, "you better stop right there. You're not getting away with this." She didn't even flinch. Instead, she raised the gun again, pointing it in my direction. "You're not going to stop me," she spat. "I'm tired of people like you thinking you can just do whatever you want. You're all the same. Her words were slurred with anger, but they didn't make any sense. She wasn't just angry about the noise anymore. She was angry at me. At what? That I had dared to stand up to her? That I had refused to let her control my life? I felt a rush of adrenaline flood my system. My daughter needed help, and I wasn't about to let this woman get away with trying to take her life. I stood up slowly, trying not to alarm her, my mind racing through every possible option. I could charge her, but I needed to make sure Mia was stable first. I couldn't lose focus. I had to keep my composure, even though every part of me screamed for justice. But just as I took a step forward, I heard the familiar sound of sirens in the distance. Relief flooded me, but it was quickly replaced by a surge of anger. Karen wasn't just going to get arrested. She wasn't just going to be taken in and let go. This was no ordinary crime, no ordinary shooting. As the police arrived, Karen turned to face them, and for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. She had underestimated me. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I had the power to make sure she faced the full consequences of what she had done. Before I could take a breath, I pulled out my badge, flashing it to the officers who had arrived. "She's under arrest for attempted murder," I said, my voice cold and steady. "Don't let her go. She shot my daughter. I'll make sure she pays for this." Karen's face went white as the officers surrounded her, but she didn't resist. I could see the realization setting in, the truth sinking in. She wasn't going to get away with this. Not this time. And as they led her away, my thoughts were already racing ahead. Mia was still unconscious, but she was alive. She was going to make it. And as soon as she was stable, I would make sure Karen paid for what she had done. I wasn't just going to let this woman ruin our lives and get away with it. I had the authority. I had the power. And now, Karen was going to face the consequences. This was only the beginning. As the police officers moved in to arrest Karen, I felt a strange mix of relief and fury surge through me. Relief, because Mia was alive, and help had arrived just in time. Fury, because this was far from over. This wasn't just some random act of violence. This was the culmination of months, no, years, of harassment, manipulation, and an utter abuse of power by someone who thought they could control my life and the lives of everyone around her. Karen had gone too far, and now it was my turn to make sure she paid. But there was something Karen didn't know, something that I had never shared with anyone in the neighborhood. It was something I kept hidden, even from my own family, for a long time. She thought she had the upper hand, that she could make people's lives miserable with her petty complaints. But Karen had no idea who she was dealing with. I wasn't just some average father trying to protect my daughter. I wasn't just another parent feeling the sting of injustice. No, Karen had just shot my daughter, and that was a line she could never uncross. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. You see, I was not only a father, I was an officer with the police department, high-ranking one at that. I had spent years working my way up through the ranks, and now I commanded a significant portion of the police force. In fact, my position gave me more power and influence than Karen could have ever imagined. I had kept this side of my life private. I didn't want to flaunt it, didn't want people to treat me differently because of the authority I wielded. I wanted to live like a regular person. I wanted Mia to grow up without constantly feeling like she had to live in the shadow of her father's career. But in that moment, as I watched Karen being led away in handcuffs, I realized that this secret, this part of me that I had kept hidden for so long, was exactly what I needed to bring her to justice. My connection to the police force was not just about wearing a badge. It wasn't about simply having the power to make arrests or call for backup. No, it was about knowing the ins and outs of the system, about understanding how the law worked and using that knowledge to ensure that Karen would never be able to manipulate her way out of the consequences of her actions. I had spent years working with people like Karen, the kind of person who thought they could control everyone around them, the kind of person who believed that their position in society gave them the right to break the rules. But what Karen didn't know was that I had connections everywhere. I knew the officers on the scene, the detectives handling high-profile cases, the district attorneys who prosecuted violent criminals. And when you're in a position like mine, you don't just command officers on the street, you command the entire system that's designed to keep people like Karen in check. I stepped toward one of the officers who had arrived, his face tight, with concern. "Make sure she's booked properly," I said, my voice calm but firm, "and ensure she's held without bail until further notice. We're looking at attempted murder here." The officer nodded, his eyes flicking to Karen, who was now in the back of the squad car, her eyes wide with fear. It seemed like she was starting to understand that she wasn't going to walk away from this. I felt a strange satisfaction in knowing that she wasn't going to get off easy. Not this time. As the officers drove away, I dialed a number I knew by heart. The phone rang once, twice, and then a voice on the other end picked up. "Detective Harris." The voice said, a tone of respect already evident in his voice. "Detective," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I need you to make sure that everything surrounding Karen's arrest is handled properly. She's been charged with attempted murder, and I want the full force of the law to come down on her. No leniency. We need to make sure she never hurts anyone again." "I understand," Harris replied. "You've got it. I'll ensure that the charges are solid, and we'll take it from there. I'll have my team start the investigation immediately." "Good. I don't want her walking free. Ever," I said, my voice hard with determination. "Understood," he responded. "It's not going to happen. I'll handle it personally." I hung up the phone, feeling a wave of reassurance wash over me. Things were moving. I wasn't just some powerless parent anymore. I was a part of the system, and I had the power to make sure Karen faced the full consequences of what she had done. But the real work was just beginning. When Mia was finally stable enough to be transported to the hospital, I went with her in the ambulance, barely able to hold it together. As the sirens blared and the paramedics worked quickly to stabilize her, I sat in silence, my mind racing. I couldn't stop thinking about how this had all started. How a simple complaint about kids making noise had escalated into a violent, life-threatening event. I thought about the kind of person Karen must have been to get to this point. She had never been content with just following the rules. No, she had to enforce them, to twist them to fit her vision of the world. But she had underestimated the people she was dealing with. She thought she could push us around, break us down, and bend us to her will. But now, she was the one who was broken. She was the one facing the full weight of justice. The thought of what might have happened if I hadn't been there to intervene haunted me. What if Mia had been alone when Karen pulled that trigger? What if I hadn't had the ability to stop Karen in her tracks, to get her arrested before she could harm anyone else? The consequences would have been unthinkable. As the ambulance pulled into the hospital, I tried to push those thoughts aside. Mia was safe for now. She had survived, and I was going to make sure that she thrived. Karen, on the other hand, was going to pay. Over the next few days, I stayed by Mia's side in the hospital, watching her slowly recover from the trauma. Her physical wounds would heal, but the emotional scars might take longer to fade, and every time I looked at her, I felt a deep sense of guilt. I couldn't help but think that if I had acted sooner, if I had done something to stop Karen before she could escalate things, it might have all been avoided. But that wasn't the world we lived in. We lived in a world where people like Karen could prey on others, thinking they could get away with anything. But I wasn't going to let that happen. Not to my family. Not to anyone else. I wasn't just a father. I wasn't just a police officer. I was a man with a purpose. And that purpose was to make sure that Karen never hurt anyone again. To make sure she paid for what she had done. As I stood in that hospital room, looking down at Mia's peaceful face as she slept, I made a vow to never let someone like Karen, someone who abused their power, who used fear and manipulation to control others, take control of my life again. I was going to make sure that Karen faced justice, and I was going to make sure that no one ever had to go through what we had gone through. The full force of the law was about to come down on her, and I was going to make sure it was as brutal as it needed to be. The days that followed the shooting were a blur of medical procedures, police reports, and the constant nagging fear that I hadn't done enough to protect my daughter. Mia was recovering in the hospital, but the emotional weight of everything that had happened still hung over me like a dark cloud. As much as I wanted to reassure myself that she was going to be okay, I knew deep down that her life, our lives, had been irrevocably changed in ways I could never have predicted. The aftermath of the shooting was like nothing I had ever experienced. In my line of work, I had seen tragedies strike countless families, but this was different. This wasn't some random act of violence. This was personal. Karen had targeted my daughter in a way that made everything I had ever dealt with as an officer seem trivial. But in the weeks that followed, as I watched Mia's condition improve and the investigation into Karen's actions unfold, I began to feel a sense of justice, slow but sure, that made everything feel just a little bit more bearable. Karen's reign of terror, her manipulation, and her psychotic need for control were finally over. The law was moving swiftly, and it was moving in a direction that I was sure would deliver the punishment Karen deserved. Karen's arrest wasn't just a matter of criminal justice, it became a community event. The news spread quickly. I wasn't sure how, but I found myself the subject of local gossip. The HOA president, who had once been a respected figure in our neighborhood, was now at the center of a violent crime. The same woman who had sent endless complaints to neighbors about trivial things like lawn care and noise was now facing a lengthy prison sentence for attempted murder. It was the kind of story people couldn't help but talk about, and to be honest, I didn't care. In the days after her arrest, Karen's social media accounts were flooded with messages, angry messages, shocked messages, and many from people who had once admired her. It was clear that the facade she had carefully built over the years was beginning to crack. The mask was off, and people were seeing her for what she truly was, a manipulative, dangerous woman whose thirst for power had driven her to do the unthinkable. Her supporters quickly turned on her. The HOA was in disarray. Without Karen's iron grip over the neighborhood, there was a vacuum of power, and no one knew how to fill it. As a result, the neighborhood was left in a state of uncertainty, with many families beginning to question whether they wanted to live in a place where someone like Karen had been allowed to run things for so long. For me, this sense of justice began to take shape, not just through the legal process, but through the community's response. People were finally seeing Karen for what she was, and it wasn't pretty. The same people who had once feared her were now coming forward, providing testimonies and evidence of the ways she had manipulated them, threatened them, and bullied them into compliance. The police officers who had arrested Karen had all come to my house to check on Mia and to discuss the case. They were the first ones to tell me how thoroughly the investigation was going. They were eager to ensure that Karen faced the maximum penalty for what she had done. They told me that the case was being treated as a major crime, not just a simple neighborhood dispute gone awry. The full weight of the law was coming down on Karen, and I was making sure of it. By the time her preliminary hearings started, the community had turned on her completely. It wasn't just the shooting, it was everything else she had done in the name of control, the countless complaints, the harassment, and the manipulation. Karen's actions had finally caught up with her in a way that couldn't be ignored, and the justice system was holding her accountable for the damage she had done to so many lives. Mia, for her part, was doing her best to heal. She was in physical therapy, working hard to regain strength and mobility, but the emotional scars were another matter entirely. She was understandably frightened. She didn't want to go outside anymore. She didn't want to play with her friends. And the idea of seeing Karen again, of hearing her name, seeing her face, was too much for Mia to handle. As a father, there was nothing worse than watching your child suffer like that. The guilt hit me hard, and for a while, I felt like I had failed Mia. I should have seen the warning signs sooner. I should have protected her more. But the truth was that Karen's actions had taken us all by surprise. No one could have known she would go this far. I spent every moment I could with Mia, trying to comfort her and help her find her way back to the life she had before all of this. but the scars, both physical and emotional, were real. I tried to shield her from the media frenzy surrounding Karen's arrest, but the news was everywhere. People on the street would whisper when they saw us. And at school, Mia was starting to feel the weight of her ordeal. Then one afternoon, I came home to find Mia sitting on the couch, her face pale and quiet. It had been a few weeks since the shooting, and she had started to improve. But today was different. She had been quiet all day, and when I asked her what was wrong, she hesitated before speaking. "Dad," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "What's going to happen to Karen? Is she going to hurt someone else?" My heart broke at the question. Mia's childhood, her innocence, had been stolen in an instant, and yet there was still hope in her voice, hope that maybe, just maybe, we could get through this, that Karen's actions wouldn't define her life forever. I took a deep breath, sitting down next to her. "Karen is going to face justice, Mia," I said, trying to sound confident, though the uncertainty still lingered in my chest. "What she did was wrong. She hurt you, and she hurt so many others, but she won't get away with it. The law is going to make sure of that." "Will she be in jail forever?" Mia asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know for sure, honey," I said softly. "But what I do know is that she's not going to hurt anyone else. Not again. We're safe now." As much as I wanted to promise her that everything would be perfect again, I knew that the healing process wouldn't be quick. Mia would need time. She would need space to rebuild the trust and joy she had once had in her world. But we would get through it together, one day at a time. And as the trial began, I watched as Karen's case was presented in court. The evidence against her was overwhelming. There were testimonies from neighbors, statements from officers, and even video footage showing her interactions with other families in the neighborhood. The case was airtight. In the end, Karen's sentence was severe. She was convicted of attempted murder and was sentenced to a long prison term, the maximum allowed for the crime she had committed. The judge also imposed additional charges for harassment, threats, and other criminal actions she had taken against the community. The judge's words were clear. Karen's reign of terror had finally ended, and the law had found her guilty of a crime she could never take back. It was over, and though the damage she had done to Mia's sense of security couldn't be erased, justice had been served. Karen would never again be able to control or manipulate anyone else. For me, for Mia, and for the rest of the neighborhood, it was a hard-earned victory. But it was a victory nonetheless. As I sat with Mia after the trial, her eyes filled with uncertainty, I knew that the road to healing would be long. But as long as we were together, there was nothing we couldn't face. Now that you've heard our story, how we went from being just a regular family to fighting for our lives and the safety of our children, I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced someone like Karen? Someone who thought they could control your life, manipulate you, or push you around? How did you handle it? Drop your thoughts, your stories, and your experiences in the comments below. If this story has made you realize just how important it is to stand up for yourself and your loved ones, don't let it end here. Hit that subscribe button so you can stay updated on more stories like this, stories of strength, resilience, and justice. And if you know someone who's been through something similar, share this video with them. Together, we can stand up to those who try to control us and make sure that justice is always served. Remember, no one has the right to take away your peace. Keep fighting for what's right, and don't let anyone intimidate you. Subscribe now, and let's continue this journey together. Thank you for being part of this community. You're never alone in your fight for justice.